All right, so 2 hours of stream now. And what I want to do is that I want to read an article that I found. I read it before, but it was like a couple of years ago. I mean, a couple of years. It can be like 1 year. It was almost a year ago. I read it some time ago. So, I want to read this article. Why? One, because it's cool to comment things. Have this kind of like react kind of content. And two, because I also need to put some more content on my YouTube. Right? And I feel this makes sense. So I will turn up music. And now we can read this article. All right. So, how to market a game? Feel confident marketing your game. No, this is not the name of the article. The missing middle in game development. Posted on September 28, 2023 by Zuckerus. So, here's one thing. I think it's good that I start reading by here because what is this website about? How to market a game. It is a website that is selling marketing courses and content for marketing your own game. So it's selling a solution here for a problem, which is the problem of marketing and gathering community for your own game, basically, right? It's selling a solution for this problem. For the fact that like there are a lot of the market saturation. There are many games in the market, so how you can stand out, with so many games around. And I think that's kind of important to know because that's a perspective. I don't think like this, it's a bias. It's not like I'm not saying this was made in bad faith, but it's certainly a bias of this article here. So it's good to understand a little bit of this, what are the intentions of this website? It is to sell this marketing solution, right? But okay, the missing middle in the game development. What is the missing middle? Other than he is my total hero, and he was born and he was raised in my hometown. I wanted to interview John Romero to try and solve the modern indie game development paradox. So John Romero is the legend behind Doom and Quake, alongside John Carmack. And I think those are the two guys here. So, okay, the paradox goes like this. When John Romero was making games in the 90s, there was no digital distribution, so you had to get a company like Softdisk to publish you and physically manufacture and distribute your games by mail. There was no Unity, GameMaker, Godot, or Unreal, so if you wanted to make a game, you had to have a full-time person, in their case John Carmack, crafting your game engine from scratch, usually in C or machine code every time. There was no widely accessible internet or cloud-based source control or storage, so you couldn't work remotely. Yet, despite all the limitations of the 90s, the guys at ID Software could make 13 games in 1 year. 13 games in 1 year is a freaking lot. It's like, what? How many? A little less than a month for each game, which is absolutely insane. How is it that we have better tools which should make us more productive and better communications that should increase collaboration and digital distribution which has essentially zero marginal cost, and yet games takes longer to make? Indie game developers were supposed to be small, nimble, and quicker than the hulking, slow-moving AAA Goliaths. What happened? Important, this is not a lazy devs argument. Everyone is working their ass off those days. My concern is that when I talk to first game devs, they almost always tell me they are 2 years deep into their 4 years project. That scares me. That's a really good point. That's actually a really, really good point. I mean, from the production kind of side, what happened that now even indie developers are taking so long to make a game, right? In today's post, I want to explore why new indie game developers plunge themselves into much longer game development cycles. The industry has essentially stretched us to cut out one of the most important stepping stones between tiny games and multi-year projects. This has caused developers to have incorrect assumptions, wasted resources, and burnout. Also, wanted to excuse to write a post that includes as many pictures of the Doom guys wearing shorts as possible. Perfect. Perfect 90s style. My theory, the missing middle. The modern indie game business model and development process has a missing middle problem. For the last decade or so, the business model of the first indie studios goes something like this. We are a team of 3 developers and did a game jam. Published it on itch.io, had fun, people seemed excited for a game, so we formed an LLC, which is a company, limited time company, I think. What is an LLC? Limited liability company, okay. Signed with the publisher and are planning to spend 3 years making our first game for which our goals are modest. We really only want to obtain $300,000. The mentality right there is the missing middle problem. Those days, studios either make jam games that they hammer out in a weekend, then they post to itch.io for free, or they burn the ships, quit their jobs, and make multi-year mega projects that can only be profitable if they earn multiple hundred thousands of dollars. What is a middle game? Those are games that are bigger and more polished than a game jam, but are not huge. 30-hour epic triple I indie games. A middle game should only take 1 to 9 months to create and can be profitable, or at least not a money sink, because it is expected to earn in the range of $10,000 to $40,000. Middle games used to be the norm. The middle used to be the goal. The middle was how you built a career. Okay, first, before going on, I think the first thing that I think is a problem here is the fact that what is the expectation of a middle game? Because if you think about pricing, when you think about pricing for a middle game, you are talking about, for example, what was the name? Hades. How much Hades 2 cost? Hades 2 cost 30 euros. How much Hades 1 cost? Because remember, like when Hades launched, it was for indies, it was a very 25 dollars. So I remember it was a problem when Hades 1 launched for a lot of indies because it set the expectation of every 20 bucks game to be Hades, right? And this is a problem because like Hades was made by Supergiant, which is a company that is developing this kind of game for a while, and they have the technology, and they have like even Transistor and Bastion. They are making these games, they are polishing their own mechanics and their own game design for a long time, and they are able to make a Hades-like game reasonably fast. Remember how long it was made? Like how long does Hades took to make? Hades development time 3 years. So it's more or less the same amount. It's much less than a AAA game. It is more or less the same amount of time than other indie developers, but it was one of the best games of the year by far. And and not even like considering the fact that it was like a double A or indie game. No, it was like simply one of the best games of the year, right? But size-wise, Supergiant is an indie game company. So I think the problem is all about expectations and content expectations. Still, I lost the article here. I can close those windows here. So yeah, I think the problem here is all about expectations, right? Still, a middle game should only take 1 to 9 months to create and can be profitable, because it's expected to earn in the range of 10,000 to 40,000. Also, let's consider the fact that, okay, if we take 9 months to make a 40,000 game, how much is it in like per month? Calculator. 9 divided by 40. No, wait, I'm stupid. It is 40,000 divided by 9. So around $40,000 a month. $40,000 a month. No, 40,000. $4,000 a month. So around $4,000 a month, you can only pay one person. You can't pay a team. Especially if you consider the fact that if you're selling on Steam, like maybe I think like 30% is going to Steam, right? So even less goes to the developers. So yeah, I'm not sure like if this is this profitable enough for an indie company? Is this something that you can sustain yourself doing? I don't know. I'm I have my doubts here on this math. If the math checks out to survive as an indie company. Middle games used to be the norm. The middle used to be the goal. The middle was how you build your career. But now to the modern indie dev, look at those guys here. This is John Carmack, so this is Romero. But now to the modern indie dev business model, especially the ones hanging out on r/game dev, earning 40,000 $40,000 or less is considered a complete failure and should be mocked publicly. This is them speaking, not me. To the modern indie dev business model, dedicating just 3 months or less to your first project is shocking. And when I say that, they react as if I am asking someone to perform a backflip to the moon or to change their blood type using transcendental meditation. Dedicating just 3 months to your first project is shocking. I mean, to whom you speak to? This is not shocking. This is okay depending on... Okay, well, never mind. I believe the modern indie business model that skips over developing middle games is why 75% of studios on Steam have released one and only one game. Number of games per studio. Number of indie studios. Okay. Why did this happen? Indies stopped developing middle games because the industry stopped directly paying for them. Quick history lesson. In John Romero book Doom Guy, the first time he was paid for making a game was Apple II game he published called Scout Search for Insider magazine. The magazine paid him $100 for it, $300 in 2023 dollars. Here's the picture of the magazine. Scout Search is a low-res maze game, and the object for you, the Scoutmaster, to get all your Cub Scouts before the killer grizzly attacks them. Okay. Side note, get it? It is an Apple computer game called Insider. Get it? No, I don't. Here's a... Ah, Cedar. Ah, okay. That's fun. Here's a picture of the game. Beautiful. For early in the software distribution, mechanisms would literally reprint source codes and people would retype that code into their computer to play the game. That's awesome. Obviously, the games had to be tiny enough to be printed in a magazine and be manually retyped by a human. That's less awesome. The payout was in the hundreds of dollars, but that was what the expectation was at the time. Softdisk, the company John worked for before starting ID Software, would pay developers a flat fee to the rights to ship their game on their monthly software disk. Softdisk negotiated a 6-game deal with John's ID Software for $5,000 per game, about $100,000 per game in 2023 dollars. That was the expectation for games at the time. In the days of Flash games, Flash portals like Congregate, Armor Games, and Newgrounds paid indie games developer a flat fee to have their logo embedded in their game. For a decent game, Flash portals paid indies in the range of $10,000 to $30,000-ish dollars. That was the expectation for games at that time. Back in the day, there was an income ceiling to indie game development. Publishers paid a small flat fee per game. Nobody was getting rich off one game, so developers were incentivized to make lots of games that were small, quick, and fun. Back in the day, making a game and earning $15,000 from it was totally expected. Nobody said, failed game. Nobody called it indie apocalypse. That was just what games earned. Here's a quote from Flash game developer who used those smaller games and eventually became a hit Steam developer of games like Coffee Talk. I would make the art and a friend would do the code. We could make a simple game in a week and that could sell for 500 in sponsorship. $500 in sponsorship. We made the first Infectonator game in a month, and that game got $5,000 in sponsorship plus 20k in performance bonuses. Some sites would offer performance bonuses where they would reward based on how many times the game was played. More plays means more ads traffic for the sponsor. It's basically revenue sharing from the ads that the game generated in the sponsor site. We learned a lot about game design from those flash days. Earning only $25, earning only $25. Aha, I can't read. Earning only 25k for a game sounds terrible now, but when your game is made in a week, middle games were a great way to learn game development and build a career. I mean, a week is very different than 1 to 9 months, right? And you're talking about a day and age in which this kind of game here was able to get some traction much easier than today. I'm not sure if I'm making excuses here, but the problem is that I still feel like there's is a different thing than saying that you can sell this same kind of game on Steam and make a profit. Because again, the expectations are very different, right? Like the same argument here, you're basically saying that this same game would make the same amount of dollars on Steam. And that is not true. And I think that's a problem. Because it's a very different market, it's a very different ecosystem right now. Flash games are dead. Browser-based games, I'm not sure how many, like how much you get from browser games today. Like how much is the profit of a browser-based game? I have no idea. But I wouldn't bet it's like in the 5 digits. I don't think it would ever reach 5 digits. Unless it's a very specialized, I don't know, it's a very niche portal or very niche browser-based game. So I don't know. I feel like it is comparing a little bit apples to bananas or something, but you're not comparing equivalent ecosystems or equivalent markets. Okay, let's keep up. Middle earning games are still the norm. People just don't realize. Okay, so Gammalytic recently published a blog post. We can read that later. Steam revenue infograph. So it's an infograph. Oh, okay, of Steam revenue on 2023. Gammalytic recently published a blog post that did some filtering to see what the true median income for Steam is. They filtered out cheap asset flip games that cost less than $5 and found that the median revenue is $4,000. Okay, they also filtered out games that cost less than 10 and found the median revenue was 17,000. 17,000 in today's dollars is basically what Softdisk was paying ID Software per game back in the 90s. And actually, the number of games that have earned 10,000 in the first 3 months is growing. Okay, so 10,000 in the first 3 months is around $3,000 a month. On Steam, and I don't think this is the profit, the liquid profit, right? So the payment for the devs are $2,000 more or less per month of work. 2,000, 2,500, I think. So that means that it's only like it's the payment for one developer, right? To develop a game in 3 months. And even then, it's a very low salary. But it is a salary nonetheless. Those are numbers. And actually, the number of games that have earned $10,000 the first 3 months is growing. Games that made over 10k within the first 3 months. And this is after filtering games that cost less than 10. So you're talking about a game that costs at least $10. Okay. So why it is so bad now that games earn 10,000 when 30 years ago it was the norm? Because now there's a slim chance to become super rich because of the indie utopia. Okay, I see where the argument is. So the argument is that people see in bad, like with, they have a bad bias on games that earn only, between quotes, 10,000 bucks, right? If you get 10,000 bucks for a game that was made in 3 months, that is, that is a profit. That is a profit. But people prefer to bet on games that, can become a hit and become, uh, something extraordinary and make you super rich. So people prefer to bet on those blockbusters kind of games, or like indie hits, than just focusing on those small games. Okay. The birth of the indie utopia. Everyone complains about the indie apocalypse, but not enough people consider that we just lived through an indie utopia in the form of digital distribution and mega earning games. That is true. In 2004, digital distribution arrived to consoles with the original Xbox Live Arcade. Games like Geometry Wars were huge and earned millions. For PCs, digital distribution always sort of existed, but it kicked into high gear in 2005 when Steam opened up to third-party games. The first non-vol game appeared on Steam was Ragdoll Kung Fu, which you can still purchase today. It only has 53 reviews. That's interesting. So that was the first game ever published on Steam. Look at that. That's a photo, that's not even a video. The first ever one Valve game to appear on Steam platform. And interestingly enough, it just have like 53 reviews. Ten years ago, this was the first game I've ever bought on Steam. I'd like to thank it for setting me up for failure in life. Beautiful review. Okay, with the birth of digital distribution, suddenly a game produced by indies could earn millions of dollars. In sales, emphasis on could, instead of just earning $10,000 paid up front by some platform like Congregate. Is that documentary indie game movie almost seemed like Xbox Live propaganda telling developers that you will make millions of dollars. That is true. Indie game the movie is a hell of a good movie, but it's also like a little bit of it can be misleading if you're not mature enough in the industry. Then in 2007, with the birth of the iPhone, and 2008 with the App Store and the free-to-play model, the Flash game portals were dead. And without Flash, nobody was paying developers a flat rate to make smaller games. Free-to-play and ad-supported games could make millions of dollars. When Flappy Bird hit in 2014, everyone was whispering about how the developer was earning $50,000 per day in ad revenue. Numbers like that make the 10,000 plus ceiling that Flash Portals paid out seem laughable. What developers would want to settle for $10,000? What developers would want to settle for $10,000 when they could earn 100 times that? AAA became huge. At the same time, indies were getting $1 million payout. AAA games flourished too. Games like Call of Duty, Bioshock, and GTA, Skyrim, Last of Us, and Dark Souls became mainstream. Games became more profitable than movies. People stopped going to arcades to play silly little action games. Instead, people could play beautiful AAA games at home on their consoles and PC. Simultaneously, the free-to-play model changed game design so that retention was the most important metric. Free-to-play would exploit quick-hit arcade-style games like Bejeweled or Frogger, and then bolted on a massive retention system in the form of upgrades, power-ups, and multi-currency schemes, and birthed complex chimeras like Candy Crush and Subway Surfers. So quick-hit arcade games like John Romero published for Insider magazine were no longer in vogue. Excuse me. Since 2001, with the Xbox and PS2, AAA games have become so amazing and so beautiful and so ubiquitous that an entire generation of gamers have grown up assuming that a game 10-15 hours linear cinematic experience with amazing graphics. Those young gamers who later became developers never had a chance to play silly little games that are worth about 10,000. They had never had a chance to experience what a middle game is. Platforms, publishers, and investments firms grew up too. When the rest of the industry started earning $1 million payouts, the third-party business that funded the middle market grew up too. I keep my ear to the ground, and most major indie game publishers and platforms won't even consider funding a game for less than 200,000 bucks. In fact, I have heard about indies pitching the big publishers 25 to I don't know how to read numbers. $250,000 budget games, and the publisher coming back saying increase your budget and how much you're asking for, and maybe we'll publish your game. So developers scale their game up, double how much they were asking for, and then they got funding. Publishers want to see a big payout, and they know that only comes from big budget games. That is true. The original game that an indie developer pitched was totally fine before the publisher asked the developer to blow the budget. The game would have probably been even better if they just left it at the size it was originally. Publishers don't have time to fund and support a game that is expected to earn just $17,000 in revenue. If the publisher negotiated a 30% revenue split, that means that after Steam cuts, taxes, etc., they will be earning less than $3,500. That just doesn't scale for publishers, so mid-tier games are worthless for them. Yeah, publishers they have a similar strategy than venture capital, I think, which is basically you're trying to spread your investment in lots of games that have the potential to become a huge hit. Because if there is one huge hit in like 30 or so games, that means that this game will pay for every other game that failed, right? I think that's the norm for most publishers. And that's the same thing with venture capital. The exception became the rule. When games had the possibility of earning developers millions, every developer mentally expected games to do that well. Our expectations become outsized and distort. I'm guilty of distorting the expectations too. I mostly write about games that are top sellers such as Domekeeper, Pegling, Zero's Levered. To be fair, I do sometimes cover games that are medium hits, such as Revenue Devils and all those more modestly selling opportunities. What do he make like articles about this kind of games? Ooh, that's nice. Huh. So it's like a little bit of a article about niches and some of the games that are selling well on Steam. How Pegling made 1 million in a week. Jesus. Interesting. Oh, that's a gacha kind of game. Okay. That's on Steam. Okay, interesting. So it's kind of like a deconstructors of fun kind of website. We forgot how to make small games. Basically, when developers might earn millions of dollars from an indie game, everyone gets the number in their head as the expectation for releasing a game. Every game that doesn't earn 1 million must be a failure. If you step back, the expectations that contemporary developers have for themselves is quite insane. One, try out a concept with a game jam that you made in 2 to 5 days. 2, dedicate 3+ years of your life to create a flawless masterpiece that will earn you 1 million. If you messed up 2, you waste 3 years of your life and fail. This is crazy. What we can learn from our forerunners and the birth of ID software. My favorite sci-fi trope is when scientists uncover an ancient alien civilization that was super advanced but somehow managed to implode, and the scientists dig up their lost ancient machinery so that we can learn from their long-lost genius. See the Alien franchise film Prometheus, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Halo, etc. We need to go back. Basically, we need to dust off the ideas team's jorts and figure out how to make smaller games in faster timelines. John Romero isn't even that old, so it shouldn't be that hard to get back at it. Here are some lessons that I think we can learn from a game dev's forerunner. Set expectations. Be a game assuming you will earn $10,000, not 1 million. How long should you build with that goal? How much should you spend on art? What creative compromises will you make? Limits create great art. Okay, expect to release multiple games per year. Yes, it can be done. You don't have to release 13 like ID Software did in 1991, but you can release more than one game per year. Be aware of the market. I know it is uncool to make a market-based decisions that compromise your true artistic vision, but successful developers have always done that. John Romero worked for Infocom and had experience making huge RPGs. He also loved deep RPGs like Chrono Trigger and Ultima. The guys at ID Software played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. John Carmack was the dungeon master, but when John Romero co-founded ID Software, he knew his small team couldn't create deep, story-rich RPGs, so they purposely chose not to. Similarly, despite early success with 2D platforms like Keen and Dangerous Dave by 1991, Romero knew that the industry was transitioning to 3D games, so ID Software changed their strategy to keep up with the times. Guys, we should not be doing this game. We have this cool technology that we are not using, that we're not taking advantage of, to make a better vision of that game going forward. John Romero. John Romero was an amazing. Like I read Masters of Doom, which is a really, really great book about ID Software history and John Romero and John Carmack. And yeah, he had like a really good vision of market vision, I think, for his games. ID Software could have spent years heads down working on their magnum opus game Doom with the most advanced tech, but they didn't have the runway or the capital or the expertise or the audience to do that yet. Instead, they released several smaller games, each one built on the same engine, but with a slight improvement over the previous one. This allowed team to earn money while they research better tech. So this is one thing that I think it's a really good suggestion, which is to reuse tech. And we've seen this, and we're starting to see this more, I think, in the AAA space. I mean, we always seen this on the AAA space, but I think it's more obvious with some specific games. For example, Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Zelda, Breath of the Wild, which is the newest Zelda, Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. And like Tears of the Kingdom was a clear upgrade from Breath of the Wild, but it's still like the same engine, right? And most of the assets, so they had more time to polish the correct things or the right things instead of like just pumping up more assets to create another huge game like it was Breath of the Wild. Spread research and development across several games. Here's a brief history of games made by ID Software team that demonstrate how they use multiple releases to incrementally upgrade their research. Catacomb. Released in 1989, this was John Carmack's early 2D game for softdisk. Here the basic gameplay is established, such as basic dungeon crawling, aka Gauntlet, and attacking enemies with a weapon where you hold down the fire button to charge up. There was also keys, potion spells, etc. Just like Gauntlet, I think. Hover Tank. Released in 1991, this is the first real 3D engine ID Software created. Notice how Hover Tank's walls are solid colors. At the time, they didn't know you could scale bitmaps to create texture walls. But who needs textures? Also, the controls kinda sucked and don't feel responsive. But the basic UI is innovative for the time. It includes a radar that shows you where the enemies are, which is still used to this day in FPSs. Catacombs 3D. Released in 1991, this game builds off the Hover Tank engine and adds texture walls. Look at that cool brick pattern. The game also had improved controls, multiple weapons, keys, healing potions, and a new compass, which is still used in modern FPSs and games like Skyrim. But notice that Catacomb 3D still has the basic game design as Catacomb 2D. It's still dungeon crawling. There are bolts, nukes, heals, keys, and it is score based just like the 2D version. Also notice how the team has basically the same red brute sprites between Hover Tank and Catacomb. They just gave them yellow eyes and toenails. That is true. Huh. Wolfenstein 3D, the big hit, released in 1992. This is built on the same 3D engine as the previous games, but now has VGA graphics instead of the smaller color palette of the EGA graphics that Catacomb 3D used. Wolfenstein also used all the gameplay mechanics such as secret walls, better weapons, and the ability to add some triggers to the map that can alert remote guards when you shoot. Doom! the big fella. Released in 1993, this game truly revolutionized the industry. It was built on an entirely new engine that incorporated everything John Carmack learned, making Overtime Catacomb 3D and Wolfenstein 3D. The game finally featured diminishing lighting, sky textures, variable height floors, non-orthogonal walls, and even a head bob when you run. Basically, Doom was not a game that came from thin air. It was built slowly over years through smaller releases, feedback from the marketplace, and constant iteration. If back then ID Software used the modern indie all or nothing method of production, they would have gone silent for 3 years with no market feedback, no funded R&D on their engine, no practice in 3D level design, no building an audience, no building an audience. It would have been designed in the dark and may have never been discovered or even made it to release. Yeah, has a long history here. Reuse tech infrastructure. Through the development of their dozens of games, John Romero created Tile Editor, aka TED, which was ID Software in-house editor to create levels for many of their games. The editor was flexible enough that it could be reused over and over, despite each game having slightly different engines. Over the years, the tool created levels for the 2D platformer Commander Keen, or simple 3D games such as Wolfenstein 3D. John Romero commented in this tweet that over 33 games were made using the TED V5 tool. TED was even used by other companies to make levels for their games. Here's a screenshot of TED being used to make levels for Apogee's Rise of the Triad. Look at the charts. The Great Charts versus Hammer Pants debates. The daily dilemma everyone in the 90s faced. Okay. Learn what a small game is. Whenever I give a talk and say more indies should make a game in 6 months, people's heads explode. They leave nasty comments on the YouTube video. It's impossible. AAA games have warped our brains as to what the skill of a game is. Blockbuster indie games like Hollow Knight and Factorio have warped our brains as to what the skill of a game is. You cannot make those games in the short runaway needed for middle games. We don't even remember what small fun games feel like anymore. So I'm going to show you real-world examples of actual indie games who have actually made good quality, moderately profitable, non-asset flip games. Your homework assignment is to download those. You should play them. We need to relearn what middle games feel like. Now you might look at those games and say, Chris, this game failed, it only has 123 reviews. Remember, we're living the land of middle games. If you only spend 3 months on a game, 123 reviews can mean the game is quite profitable on a per hour dev time. Okay, so there are a couple of comments here. First, if people don't know about middle, like what a middle game is anymore, that is a problem, not for the developer, but also like for profiting over the game, right? Because if gamers don't know how, if gamers have the wrong expectation on your game because they don't know what a middle game is, then they either are expecting a very small game, but you are pricing it more, so they won't buy your game, or they are expecting a huge hit or a huge game or a game with lots of content, and they are buying your game with that expectation. For example, you're selling your game for $10, and they are expecting, I don't know, a Hades-sized game. But you're not making Hades. You're making a game in 9 months or 3 months. And that's a problem, right? So I think that's one point here of argument. The second point is that making a game in 6 months, that means that you have to have a runaway. Which indie studio has runaway nowadays? That's another problem, right? Where the runaway comes from. You're basically betting on a game that no publisher wants to finance, which makes sense, right? For the publisher point of view, they want huge hits. They don't want like middle-sized games. So no publisher will want to publish it, and you will have to bet on the game yourself. And betting with publisher money is much better, right? Because then your runaway becomes the offset given to you by the publisher. So not spending your own money. So I think that is the problem of runaway here. Like, who is betting? Like, if you want to bet on yourself to make this kind of like small games in a couple of months, then you have to have a lot of runway to do that. But anyway, real world, middle-sized games. Let's see. Cozy Bee. I am such a fanboy of Cozy Bee games. Most of the games by this one-person team are developed in less than a year. Here are a few of them. They are in the right genre for Steam management. They have the right graphical style, cozy. They're just so smart. Capybara Spa, Lemon Cake, Bunny. Capybara Spa, I think I heard about. Overwhelming positive. That's cute. That's really cute. Look at the capybaras. 20 minutes still down. I wrote about 20 minutes still down in my blog post here. Ignore the fact that it made millions of dollars. Just ignore the fact. The interesting thing is that it was initially released after fewer than 3 months of development time. 20 empty days was a middle break from a game that the developer has been working on for years. Middle games to the rescue to stop burnout. Sock Pop Collective. The Sock Pop guys are amazing. Sock Pop Collective releases a game a month. Behind the scenes, there are really 4 developers who work alone releasing their games, typically after a staggered 3 months dev cycle. They have their own way of doing things, and I would say go a bit too crazy switching up genres too fast and not doubling down on proven genres, which is why you see such variation in their sale numbers. But who cares, they seem to be having fun and they are still releasing interesting art, so good on them. If you look at their titles, you will notice that the most successful games are the ones in Steam's preferred genre, crafty beauty strategy games. Those are Pyramida, Stacklands was quite a hit, I think. There's still, ooh, it is quite a hit. Twin, Guardian, Look It Down. The less popular ones are typically platformers, linear narrative games, and super experimental avant-garde genre. Lucky Be a Landlord, the anti-capitalist. This also was like made $1 million. This anti-capitalist slot machine roguelike was a hit, but it didn't have to be due to the short production time. I asked developer Delorio about the development process. The first public build of Luck Be a Landlord took about 2 months from its initial concept to the demo release in the Steam Game Festival Autumn Edition. I originally was working on it for this game jam, before I expanded it for a bigger project. Look at this tweet. The Scrum was developed in months, and you can actually follow along the developer's process with this day-by-day devlog, and more game marketing and making thoughts on their main blog. Scripts and Vampire Survival likes are great examples of one way to make a quick games that Steam actually pays attention to, is to take a classic old arcade game or flash game and add a roguelike meta progression on top of it. Classic indie strategy. City builders and civilization style games are the biggest genres on Steam, but developers always say, well, those take years to make. But they don't have to take long if you focus on finding what the fun actually is behind them and stripping away everything else. A perfect example of this is Islanders, which is a minimalistic city builder that took the team only 7 months to develop. Horror games are a very, very popular genre with gamers on Steam, and this developer made Backroom Apprehension and Don't Look Away in 1.5 months each. Here's a quote from them on this Reddit thread. I've made 2 games so far, Don't Look Away and Backrooms. They took me about 1 month and a half each, still updating them, but I did release them in early access and they are doing pretty good. Not millions, but that wasn't my goal. I just needed to make enough to quit my job and to allow me to keep making games, and I've succeeded. Nice. But Chris, you wrote earlier that Steam hates small games. That is correct. 2 years ago I said that Steam algorithm is built to hide smaller games. See, even Steam is built to suppress the missing middle. It is true that you cannot rapidly release many small games and expect to make millions, but that is okay. Remember, our brain have been triple-A'd and triple-I'd warped. In the utopia warped our brains. The whole point of middle games is to improve our tech, get your name out there a bit more, build a back catalog, practice launching, and just have some lower stakes fun. If your game that took 3 months to build did fail, don't worry, you only wasted 3 months. Move on to the next game. If you do meet the target of 10,000 revenue, that is awesome. If not, make another one. You could go to game design school and pay them tens of thousands of dollars per semester to learn how to make games, Or you could just release a bunch of small middle games and earn tens of thousands of dollars. When John Romero and ID Software released Overtime Catacombs 3D, they didn't say, our games fail, we only make 5,000. Instead, they said, it has paid R&D that was equity towards developing Wolfenstein 3D, which earned ID Software $50,000 per month a year later. Podcast failure is okay. Even if the game does fail, you shouldn't be ashamed. Watch this great segment from an interview with fine art critic David Sylvester saying artists must be allowed to go through bad periods. They must be allowed to do bad work. Don't worry, the rapid, quick middle game period is just the middle. You will someday make your big grand masterpiece. You just can't do it right now. Stick with it and you can make your masterwork someday. Final inspiration. I want to leave you with one final picture of John Romero in jorts and long-sleeve denim, long on the top, short on the bottom, and the most inspirational part of his book. Start small and get some practice. Try remaking a classic arcade game to get a feel for things before you attempt to make a giant RPG. Carmack, Tom, and I had each been making games for 10 years before we started working together. It was another few years before we made Doom, and that was my 90th game, not a typo. Oh, okay, 90th. Jesus. Give yourself time to get good and don't be dissuaded by setbacks. Game development is like gameplay. Load your save and try again. Very good article. Some interesting points. I have some counter arguments. First is that you still have the runaway problem. And you're assuming here that you can work 8 to 5 and still make a game in like 3 to 5 to 6 months, I guess. Like the problem here is like, what is the expectation here, right? What is the expectation here? Both for the developer, for the gamers, and I think there's a really big problem of setting your expectation right to the players when you're making a game. But at the end of the day, I think the expectations are based on the niche you're at, right? So it's also about finding a good niche so you can focus on, so you can implement your tech, so you can improve, and then make some money making smaller games and not like those kind of huge hits. So instead of betting on, a hit from a game jam or a 4-year development cycle, you're betting on yourself doing a game for 3 to 5 to 6 months. And that's your timeline. I honestly think that makes sense. But that's the same kind of argument on, that's the same kind of tip that I would give to anyone. Like, if you want to make a profit on your game, you have to find the right niche, right? It's all about expectations. In the end of the day, I think it's all about expectations. It's not that different, from, for example, horror games typically have this kind of like development cycle of 3 to 4 months because there is just like a good enough amount of content for this kind of game for that niche. Players are expecting this kind of like size or this kind of playtime of the game, right? So you can make a development cycle of 3 to 4 months. Roguelike too, maybe, because most of the content is generated procedurally. But it's an interesting article. Gives some interesting points and also beautiful photos of ID Software guys.